Gentlemen, we're going to continue with our discussion, a very interesting discussion here, which probably will have a lot of reactions from our audience. And my first question is for Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, is the negative perception, that's the majority from the numbers here in the survey, was it because it was highlighted by the recent death penalty case upon Andrew Chen and Yuran Sukumaran?
Well, look, I think, let's be clear, the Australia-Indonesia relationship has had cyclical highs and lows.
Yes.
And we can name the incidents. And we probably, as both Indonesians and Australians, we prefer that some of those things didn't happen. And I don't think it's right to...
Because on that case, the Australians have been the most vocal.
Well, yes, some Australians, some Australians. And one of the things about these cases of whether it's the death penalty or beef cattle, you remember, or spying and these things, is that they're not... The reaction's not universal. Sections of either Indonesia or Australia have strong views, and we see that reported. What were those factors a factor in the results of this survey, particularly the death penalty? You know, maybe a little, because the survey was done clearly after the executions. Some Australians, some would hold strong views. But I would caution you to say that it's been a very strong influence. What I would say is it may have influenced that overall favourability. But can I just share with you, this research is about the fact that there is so much in common, so much common ground. There's so much here that celebrates the two nations in trade and education and tourism and things like this. So if there were a little bit of resentment or what have you about those big issues, it seems to dissolve once we start looking at real life, life for families and what they aspire for, the future. I think the results here are really impressive. Again, particularly on education, particularly on trade, particularly on tourism.
Dan Pak Yasmi tadi yang sudah kita Mr. Ball bahas ya, survei ini bukan hanya memfokus pada perbedaan namun juga persamaan antara Australia dengan Indonesia. So, I want to hear your thoughts on tadi kan you mentioned President Joko Widodo's lack of efforts in trying to strengthen relationships between Indonesia and Australia. What about the Ministry of Education as well as the Ministry of Tourism maybe? Do you think they should play a bigger role as well? Helping the president?
Yes, certainly. I would say that the best way of diplomacy is multi-track diplomacy. It's not only first-track diplomacy from the government or only from the business sector. All sectors in government, they have to play part in diplomacy. Yeah? And then in this regard, I think they just leave it to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, for example. Of course, they are good, but their capacity is quite limited to run all efforts, all areas of diplomacy, right? Whereas in Australia, I think they have done that homework, right? And even also through the AIC, also they do lots of things as well, right? And then I would say that yes, this is our homework, and those areas that we have in common, tourism, education, business, these are areas that we have to explore further, to build further, because these areas, of course, they are aware of politics, but they don't want to be disturbed by the political brouhaha, you can say, right?
Yes.
And because those kind of things going to disrupt their activities. But
especially considering these days how the political chaos within the Indonesian government itself has been a distraction.
Yes, and I would say also, but sometimes in within these relations between Indonesia and Australia, it depends also who the leaders are, right? When at the previous era, with all due respect, when Tony Abbott was as a prime minister, he was not that diplomatic, I would say, right? In comparison to the current Malcolm Turnbull, right? So even though he was trying his best to represent the willingness or the aspirations from Australian public, but the way he conveyed the message, it was irritating Indonesian people.
Not as refined as Michael Turnbull, you say?
Yes, I would say so.
Yes. So speaking of Michael Turnbull, what do you think of the relationship between President Joko Widodo and Malcolm Turnbull?
Do you know what? I think Australians had goosebumps. They literally had goosebumps when they saw Malcolm Turnbull and President Jokowi walk in the market,
Yes.
and when they took their
Textile.
ties off together, and when they
Tanah.
laughed together. The photo of them laughing
Tanah,
together
the
is one of the
selfie.
great historic photos of our
The
for our countries.
selfie went
Yes.
The
viral.
selfie, exactly
Yes.
right. So it was good fun. It was also evidence of a very strong relationship that's emerging. This president and this prime minister have indicated to their peoples that this relationship matters. And I must say, I praise both the Indonesian government, the diplomats, the leaders in that space, and the Australian government diplomats for facilitating a lot of the work around that. That visit has reshaped this relationship in a very positive way and reminded us, and this is the nux of the matter, it's reminded us that we must focus on solutions, not problems. This research shows that Indonesians and Australians, they really want to see a more solutions-based approach taken for the future, for their children, for their children. These two neighbouring countries, it's in our lifetime. This is our responsibility. We're going to bring them closer together.